experience for Jacob. Chapter 29. This is apparently a short journey for Jacob, because in the next chapter, in the next morning, he's already made it to Haran. It took Abraham's servant on 10 camels a week or two, but Jacob is fast. Anyway, I want to read this story. Sometimes the Bible tells it so much better than I can paraphrase it. Pay attention to the little details. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it. By the way, Eliezer, if that's who it was, Abraham's servant, met Jacob's mother where?
By the well.
By the well. Do you remember later on where Moses meets his wives? At the well. That becomes what we refer to as a type scene in the Old Testament. Whenever a man meets a woman at the well, a marriage ensues in the Old Testament. By the way, that's why there is something scandalous almost about the encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. And her attitude is, why are you talking to me? Don't you know? And his attitude is, I have things to say, and it's not about what you think it is. So that's important. Anyway, 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. Now that suggests that there are at least 3 significant sheep owners in the area. Right? And it will have been a communal well. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Apparently, they put such a big rock on there as a guard, safeguard against one farmer coming and drinking the well dry, right? You had to, it's like, everybody had their own key. You had to get several folks there before there were enough to get, all right. Jacob said to them, my brothers, where do you come from? They said, we're from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we do, yeah. He said to them, is it well? They said, yes. And here is his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep. He said, look, it is still broad daylight. It's not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled. Okay, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, that would make her his first cousin. When he saw her and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. What do you notice? There are 2 things of interest to Jacob, Rachel and the sheep. That's what he sees, that's what he notices. Which did he take care of first? Sheep. And then he kissed Rachel. What conclusions do you draw about what's going on in Jacob's mind? He's flat broke, by the way, at this point in time. Didn't have a pillow last night, right? He's discovered a young woman from Haran, and he apparently thinks she's something. And she's rich, right? He sees Rachel and the sheep and makes sure the sheep get watered first. My grandmother used to say to me, Mark, she used to say, my grandmother was a piece of work. She used to say, money's not everything. She said, but, it is something. And she also used to say, beauty's only skin deep, but she said, remember, you're going to sit across from her at the breakfast table. You all would have loved my grandmother. She had a wit, parents lived on the mountain, and my grandparents lived in the valley, right at the base of where you started up the gap to go to my folks' house. By the time I was able to drive, I would never go by there without stopping, at least sticking my head in, usually get a cup of coffee. There would be times I'd leave there laughing at something she had said to me, and by the time I got to the mountain, top of the mountain, I realized she had just cut meat to the bone. I was bleeding everywhere, you know, and when your grandmother could do that to you, well, anyway. She could do it to herself. I could do a whole thing. All right. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran out to meet him, he embraced him, he kissed him, and brought him on. Oh boy, yeah. They make an agreement, by the way, right quickly, that if Jacob's going to hang around, he should, you know, Laban could use the help. And it's not right, Laban says, for me to take advantage of you because you're family and let you work for me without some, you know, something in exchange. Jacob says, well, I tell you what I would really like, and that is Rachel. But I don't have a dowry. This has been an issue before, the dowry issue. And Laban says, we can work out something. How about you work for me? You can have Rachel on the time installment plan. You work for me for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, we'll see what. Jacob says, deal. Now, well, I'll come to that in a moment. Time passes quickly in this story. They make the deal in verse 19, and in verse 21, 7 years have passed. Verse 20 says, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her.
Was that the principal or the interest?
Oh boy, there's going to be interest. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. You know this story. What happened?
He switches.
Now, I have never been, this I cannot figure out to save my life. By the way, just in case you didn't know, I will tell you, all the discussions about marriage, and biblical marriage, and we want to do it the way they did it, but there is no word in the Bible for marriage. There's no Hebrew word for to get married. There's no separate Hebrew word for husband or wife. I am her man, she is my woman. And when you get married, you go get your woman. That's the technical language. Jacob went and got, you know, that's the technical language. How do you get married? You bring her home to your tent, as Isaac did, right? And next morning, your husband and wife. There you go. No vows, no ceremonies. Maybe a party. This mentions a little bit of a party. And I wondered, how in the world you wake up the morning after your wedding night and say, wait a minute, you're not the right one. The only answer I can come up with is that the party must have been a humdinger. Is there another answer?
Weren't they veiled? Or like...
Not all night long they weren't. I mean...
It would have been dark.
Well, yeah. Yes.
What evolved such that in the New Testament they had such a big deal of the marriage of Cana?
Well, the marriage of Cana was probably the party I'm talking about, right? Jesus tells a parable about the bridegroom and the bridesmaids who were waiting for the groom to come get the wife. You remember that story? And they didn't keep enough oil in their lamps. And that's the wedding. You go get her, bring her home. Now there could be a party around it. The so-called marriage at Cana would have been the party that surrounded it, but there was no, so far as we know, there was. And now by Jesus' day they had worked out prenuptial agreements. There are a lot of so-called marriage contracts from Jesus' day and before, in which the families work out all sorts of legal things.
So it would be a contract, not a. The word marriage doesn't need to be there. It's just a contract.
They had contracts, yeah. And that was not between the bride and the groom, that was between the families. Yeah. I reiterate, there are a lot of things we don't want to go back to Bible days and do them that way anymore. And marriage is frankly one of them. We need to get that out of our mind. But anyway, I'm just flabbergasted by this anytime I read it. I swear to you, you're not slipping some woman other than the one I expect to be there in the bed with me and me not realize it till tomorrow morning, right? I don't care how big the party is. Part of that self-preservation on my part, but that's what happened to Jacob. And he's mad about it. two boys. Goes to Laban, and the interchange here. Jacob accuses Laban of Jacobing him. He says, you have deceived and cheated me. And this is where Laban, Jacob should have thought about this. Who taught Jacob to cheat the way he does?
His mother.
His mother did. And she was whose sister? Laban's. And Laban so much as says to him, he says, well, I thought you surely knew that we would not do it. We would always see to the needs of the older and the rights of the older first. We do things the right way. Which implies, what about Jacob? I know you stole your older brother's birthright and bought his birthright and stole his blessing, but that's not the, we do things correctly here. So I just thought you would assume that if you were going to marry Rachel, you'd have to marry Leah first. She's the first one. I just thought you'd think, well, I'm sorry I didn't spell out what was, to me, obvious. Right? So, in effect, Laban says, listen, boy, I know you learned from your mother, and you apparently learned pretty well, but I taught her everything she knows.
Yes.
You know, we're not playing, you know, I'm not your stupid brother, buddy. And your blind daddy. I'm Laban. Watch out. So, they work out a deal, right? Jacob is going to work for Laban for another 7 years. This time for Rachel. But Laban does concede. He says, look, finish your honeymoon with Leah, and I'll let you have Rachel on credit. As if to make the point. Now we're halfway, by the way, almost. As if to make the point. We paused here for a little while in the story. To have what? Okay, Jacob is married to 2 sisters, right? And they are whose daughters? Reckon they get along real well? I'm just going to read this to you. I call this, this is not one of Jacob's contests, but it is contest. This time it's between Rachel and Leah, and it's nothing other than a baby having contest. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, because she said, the Lord has looked on my affliction. Surely now my husband will love me. Reuben in Hebrew is, look, a son. And she said, now this will win Jacob's affection. She conceived again and bore a son. And said, now this time my husband will be joined to me because oh wait a minute, I skipped a son here somewhere. Oh, she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she named him Shimon, which means God hears. A lot of people named that Ishmael, Samuel. Again she conceived and bore a son. And said, now this time my husband will be joined to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore she named him Levi, which means added on. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Notice by the 4th son, she's no longer saying, maybe this will get, now she's just quit and said, well, I'm going to praise God anyway, whatever he said. And she named him Yehudah, which means, may the Lord be praised. Remember, I've told you over again that the biblical narrator doesn't tell us the background stuff. We have to get it from the events and the statements people make. What can we conclude about how about Jacob's affections for Leah at this point? Just by the names of the sons she's having. What can we conclude?
There's some distance.
Yeah, I mean, he outright and clearly prefers Rachel.
But he's
Yes.
such a visitor.
He's sleeping with you.
Well, that's well, you know, there is that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." Jacob became very angry with Rachel and said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Don't blame me." Then she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear upon my knees, and that I too may have children through her." So Rachel says, "Well, worked for Sarah, sort of. Right. Here's Bilhah." And Jacob said, "Okay, I'll think of no, that's okay." So she gave her maid to Bilhah as a wife. And Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan, which means judgment or judge. The name, it keeps going. Before it's over with, Leah has 4 sons, and then there's a pause. Bilhah has a couple. Leah seems to have hit a dry streak. And she says, "You can have my handmaiden Zilpah." And she has a couple of sons. And then Leah gets, you know, she comes out of her slump. She will, before it's over with, have had 6 of Jacob's 12 sons and his one daughter. Bilhah will have had 2, Zilpah 2. And Rachel comes in at the end with finally 2. 1 before they leave Laban territory. I want to read where it gets really hot and heavy. In the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went out. Now he's the firstborn son. Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Now a mandrake, we don't, you know, it's a root like a ginseng. It was thought to have had fertility properties. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband?" Leah married him first. She thinks of Rachel as the interloper. Can you imagine the dynamics in this family? I mean, we kid about, you know, you've got 4 wives, doesn't seem to mind that kind of thing. But I can just imagine, we know this much, probably each mother had a tent. They didn't all live together. They would have lived in a compound. Each mother had a tent. I don't know if Jacob would have had his own or not. He might have wished he did. But each mama would have lived in her tent with her children. You've taken away my husband, would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, "Look, I'll make a deal with you. That he may lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God heeded Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son, and she named him, I love this, Ishakar, which means I bought my husband, I rented my husband. Do you get the dynamics here? Rachel says, "Well, I'll trade you Jacob tonight for those mandrakes." I can only imagine that. That gives me a lot of information about how things. Jacob's out tending the sheep, and he comes home, and there was a bulletin board in the middle of the thing that told him which tent to go to that night. The women had been bargaining that day over making the schedule. This sounds nightmarish to me. Now there are times when I come home and I walk in the house and I go, I'm in trouble. I don't know why. Oh boy, there is that Can you imagine walking in from tending the sheep and coming into the middle of the compound and going, oh boy, and just, they've been, what if one of Bilhah's sons tore up one of Leah's sons' favorite toys? Remember, Bilhah is Rachel's handmaid. This passage doesn't tell us all of that detail, but it gives me enough to reconstruct what life must have been like. Like they were sisters, but did they get along? Let me put it this way: did they get along any better than Jacob and Esau did? My husband. No, you're not my husband. I had him first. He loved me first. He got you on credit. He paid cash for me. Do you get the dynamics of this? Hoy vey. We can put it this way. Jacob's a cheat. He learned it from his mother. She learned it from her brother. He taught it to his daughters. Ooh. This is the first time, however, we begin to see that things backfire on Jacob a little bit, don't they? Can you imagine him living in this circumstance? I would rather just be shot now than get anywhere near that. Lordy, Lordy. Let's not envy these, these men who had, was it all right to have several wives in those days? Well, it might have been all right, but it wasn't too smart.
So is that the point of the story?
No. Well, maybe. Don't envy Jacob. Don't envy Jacob. Do not envy Jacob. No, sir, Reba. Do not envy him. He's living in, I imagine they had all sorts of stomach disorders. The point of the story is, though, we need an interlude, a point to bounce back at. And why not pause and show that this culture, can we call it that? Of one-upsmanship and getting what you could no matter what, and the fair play be damned, right? I don't care if I do make you mad at me, I'm still going to get what I want. I don't care if you are my brother and you hate me the rest of your life. I don't care. I want what I want. I'm going to get it. This shows us that was not just a Jacob thing. It wasn't just a Rebecca thing. It wasn't just a Laban thing. It was the culture of this family. Reached all the way to the baby having contest. This is one of Israel's patriarchs. What do you think of it now? You want him next door? You want your daughter to marry him? Would you buy a car from him?
Was this common of the day, where all the other families were kind of doing the same churn?
I don't know if it was common for the day, but I would say that there have always been people like this.
And the rules were the rules, but this is the rule book, so it's being written on this.
Time out. Time out. I knew this was coming. Because Jacob behaved this way, does that mean that's what God wants us to do?
No.
In the book of Hosea, Jacob is brought up as an example of what's wrong with Israel. You know his name has changed. We'll talk about that later. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament is when Jesus calls was it Nathaniel? Philip's brother Nathaniel, I think it is. And this gets lost in translation because it goes from Aramaic or Hebrew into Greek and then into English, and by then it's forgotten. When Jacob's name is changed from Jacob, cheat, to Israel, right? Jesus says of Nathaniel, behold an Israelite in whom there is, this is the King James, in whom there is no guile. That would go back all the way, if you translate that back into Greek and then that back into Hebrew, Jesus said, behold an Israelite in whom there is no Jacob. Well, what's the difference in Jacob and Israel? Well, They're the same person. But God changes Jacob's name to Israel for a reason. What is it? No more of that Jacob stuff. Right? No more of that Jacob stuff. It's like a conversion thing, almost. Right? So when Jesus says, behold, here we have an Israelite who's, that Jacob heritage is gone. Is everybody following what I'm saying? Book of Hosea chapter 15, no. Book of Hosea chapter 12, maybe, complains about Israelites who have too much Jacob in them. Right? So, why is this story told this way? What do we learn from this story told this way? We should emulate Jacob? Yeah, if you want your brother to be ready to kill you, and you want to have God watching to see if you're, and you want to have wives fighting, like, yeah, that'd be emulate Jacob. I said to begin with that I thought Jacob could be the patron saint of contemporary Western culture anyway. What did I mean when I said that? Do we have an attitude abroad in our culture that says, get it if you can? The way you get it doesn't matter. I know I hurt a bunch of people on the road to my success, but I was following the rules. Why did I do it this way? Because I could. Nobody gonna stop me.
At the end of the day, Jacob was still blessed.
Hold
I mean,
on.
some people could.
We'll see how he would
say,
bless.
well, if I could do all that bad stuff and still.
Let's hold on. Hold on.
Well, all the patriarchs had foibles,
That's
to say the least.
That's absolutely, now, and what does that is an important thing to note, because we sometimes want to think that these characters in the Bible, Old and New Testament, were superhuman in some way, right? As we've read the patriarchal narrative to this point, I think we should come away with the notion that the degree to which this experiment God had with this family was a success, right? It depended for its success on God, not these people. Right? They have to cooperate to an extent, but they're such bad, partners that it depends on. And by the way, as I mentioned this before, my students will always ask, well, couldn't God find somebody better? And the answer is, who, you? You'd do a better job, would you? Huh? Not me, man. Good thing I wasn't a patriarch. I won't tell you why it's a good thing I wasn't a patriarch, but it was. Very good thing I wasn't a patriarch.
To me, it's the fact that working through such imperfect people, God is.
It gives me more respect for God's perseverance with us, God's patience, and I'll put it this way: God's skill. I mean, can you imagine how? Well, of course it's God, but we have to think in terms of if I had been trying to run this show and these people had done some of the things they had done, I would have gone, golly, Moses, how am I going to salvage this? Right? Whoa, this is a mess. And God salvages it.
He doesn't give up.
No, and God finds ways. God salvages it. This is the gospel, by the way. This is the gospel in the Old Testament. That God keeps on with God's purpose, that God's purpose for humanity is good, that God intends to bless the families of the earth, and that there's not a thing you and I can do that ultimately frustrate God's intention. Did you follow what I just said? We can make a big mess for God to clean up, but ultimately, nothing you or I can do can frustrate God's intention.
That's comforting.
It's the gospel message. We see it hanging on the cross and on Easter Sunday morning. Right? If that wasn't an attempt to frustrate God's intention, I don't know what was. And Easter Sunday came anyway. Yes?
does that give us a pass? Misbehave?
Permission to misbehave? If you want your brother to be ready to kill you. I mean, that is the message here is, we're going to see, Jacob doesn't come out of this scot-free. He doesn't come out of this scot-free. There is no coming out of these sorts of things scot-free. All of them have scars from their behaviors. And let me, fine, okay, let me make a comment about that. This notion of being real people with real mistakes carries through the whole Old Testament and on into the New, by the way. King David is one of my favorite examples of this sort of thing. And along those lines, his biggest boo-boo in life, at least as the Bible tells it, was that whole thing with Bathsheba, right? And when Nathan calls him on it, David confesses his sin. And Nathan says, okay, well, God's going to forgive you, but you've set some things in motion that are going to have to play out. This is something we don't often take as seriously as I think we should. If I were to, I don't know, do something that's very uncharacteristic of me. If I were to get sloshed drunk and take out down the wrong side of the interstate at 900 miles an hour and slam into a church van with a church youth group and set it on fire and turn, do all kind of big wreck. If I were to step out of my vehicle and say, Lord God, forgive me, would God forgive me?
Yes.
And put the fire out and reconstruct the children? And no? Oh dear.
There are consequences.
We don't live in a cartoon world in which God puts Daffy Duck's bill back on in the next frame, right? And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David, and my life and yours illustrate, if you think I can live however I want to and God will forgive me and ultimately will come out, and in the meanwhile I will leave a path of carnage and destruction behind me, yeah, that's a license to go ahead and do that. But that's not much license, is it? To think, I can go through life messing my life and everybody else's up, and at the end, it's all good. That's irresponsible, and that's misunderstanding the way the world works. And I think it's blasphemy a little bit. I think it's insulting God a little bit. All right, I've got now probably 7 minutes, and too little to launch into a next phase, which I didn't want to do anyway. I wanted us to stay here at the bottom of this trough for a little while. Floor's open to discussion about anything related to anything along these lines.
I want to go back, because somehow I cannot understand what was so important about the blessing that Jacob took from Isaac.
Yeah, no, that Jacob took, yeah. The important part of that blessing was that it guaranteed, not only had Jacob gotten sort of he cheated about it, but he sort of got the legal status of firstborn, even though that was a lie. Now, his father has endorsed that status with the blessing. Part of it has to do with the fact that we don't think about, we say, I bless you, son, in the ancient world, that was thought to have some force.
What was that?
That word was thought to have the power to create. Right? This is another thing I'm always running into situations where we compare ourselves to the ancients and say, oh, bless their hearts, they were not as sophisticated as we are. You think if I were to get my 4 children around and give them blessings that were as partisan as Jacob's blessings to his 2 children were, that I wouldn't create something in my family amongst my children? My words would make something that didn't exist before I spoke them. Is everybody with me? They're just words? Oh, no. No. And the ancients recognized that. We sometimes don't. That means we're stupider than they are, and not the other way around.
Well, did the firstborn inherit?
More than yes. And became the paterfamilias, became the head of the family, right? We already see Laban back when Rebecca was taken to be Isaac's bride, he was already, as their father was dead, and one of the older brothers was dead. He was the oldest surviving male in the lineage, and he ran the show. That would be the way it would be. Yes.
This might be too obscure, but I'm wondering to what extent, when I hear about brother against brother
Right.
and sister against sister and
Right.
stuff, it sounds horrible. It just sounds horrible, but I'm wondering to what extent back then, if you threw a rock in town, you were going to hit a cousin somewhere. I'm wondering to.
Well, yeah, but they kept going back to town to do that. I mean, they were 100 and something miles away, and they kept going back to Haran for that purpose.
What stimulates me is that Nancy loves genealogy, and she went and looked up a census during my father's early life in
Right.
Amelia County.
Right.
She pulled a page out. There were, by the way, 3 generations living in the house, and a widowed cousin,
Right.
and her 2 children. So
Right.
there was 12 people in the house.
Right.
But on the whole page, they asked everybody where they were born, and everybody on the page was born in Amelia County.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 2,500 years later. That people weren't moving very far.
Yeah. But see, these people did move and then went back. So there was a little bit of a different situation. The thing that strikes me about this is that all these years have passed, and we migrate, and we don't live the same way. But human nature is pretty much the same, isn't it? And this story is the human nature we encounter every day. And I think, well, I just don't know of a family. I don't know of one. And this varies by degree, of course. You know, I mean, I feel like I'm asking you to bow your head and close your eyes and raise your hand if this is true of you. If you have a sibling, or one or more, you have had tensions with them, haven't you? And sometimes those tensions have, no, not sometimes. Usually, those tensions have traced back to some way the parents related to you, right? Or you're relating to the parents. Yes? I'm living with this now. My in-laws live with me. And my wife is the oldest of 3, and the other 2 live in the D.C. area. And they're really good about calling and giving us advice. We're going to have to edit the tape now. That's going out. Somebody might see that. I heard about a family in which this was true. Right?
And it often has to do with money.
It will have to do with what do you think this blessing was about? Right? And birthright, what's that about? And Rachel's sheep, what is that about? Yes.
So what's the rule about interest? Wasn't there a rule against?
Well, I mean, if you get the sheep, then who cares about that? You don't have to have it. I mean, this is not about a loan, this is about ownership, right? And apparently by this time in Abraham's life, he'd gotten to be pretty wealthy, and apparently Isaac had gotten to be pretty wealthy. And Jacob left home penniless.
How long after the events actually happened was this all written down?
Oh, we don't know. But we do know that the stories would have been told orally for generations.
Right. I was just going to say, how do you, I mean, there were a lot of different events going on, a lot of different people. How do we know that all of this was written down accurately? I mean, if we started a message with Bruce and got to the end, it probably wouldn't. You've done that in school. It's not accurate.
Actually, that may account for why there's such little detail on these stories. Have you noticed how little detail there is? 7 years later, he married, and 30 years, he was born in verse 2, and he was a 29-year-old man in verse 3. I mean, the detail, we don't know. But one of the things I would say about that, I would say, I got a bunch of things I can say about that, but the things I'm going to say right now about that are that the reason these stories, I think, sound so true to human nature may be, in fact, you have to ask yourself, are there any stories in your family heritage that get told across generations? There probably are. Why? Why is that story remembered and told from generation to generation? And the answer is because it tells something characteristic or essential that you're either very proud of or very want to use a morality tale, right? You tell this story to say to your children, now this is the kind of mistake Granddad made. Don't you do it. Although more often we tell, things we're proud of. This is the standard. And we pass it. So you have to ask yourself, why were these stories remembered in the first place? Right? And one of the things I think I get from it is that they do come from a place in which these sorts of family dynamics were true. And I think the stories are told in a rather admonitory fashion. And we're going to see Jacob gets himself between a rock and a hard place for sure here soon. And you want to say to yourself, as the prophet Hosea did, and then as Jesus did later, yeah, we tend to be this way. But we'd be better off if we were more like Israel than we are like Jacob. They're the same person. I thought I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say the story you told about the man who vowed to
Jephthah. Yeah.
sacrifice the
Yeah.
person. That comes right down to the Greek.
It's very similar, yes, yeah.
A Greek
Yes.
story from one of the, I can't remember who it is. but
Yeah.
one of the-
Iphigenia.
Yeah, Iphigenia.
Iphigenia.
I want to remind people, as I often do, the Hebrews were writing, they invented the alphabet, that the Greeks adapted 3 generations, 3 cultures later. Yes. The Greeks were figuring out how to, when the Hebrews had a kingdom. And the Hebrews came along after the mess. Do you know that the pyramids had been standing for 1,200 years when Moses walked the sands of Egypt? 1,200 years. Yes, and when the pyramids were built, the Greeks might have been learning how to weave cloth. I'm not sure if they were that far along. We are raised in a culture which looks back to the Greek as the foundation of all modern science, modern culture. They were newcomers in comparison to the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians and even the Israelites and so forth. So what you mean to say is that Iphigenia may have known this Jephthah story. Yeah. Next week we're going to see how Jacob extricates himself from this. And the answer is, not so well.
Loves one better than the other. You can't do that.
But by the way, I know we just heard it, but she made a comment. This one loving the other better, in pairs. Joseph does it to his sons. David does it to his sons. There are several instances of this in the Bible, and it always works out poorly. It always does. You could argue that if there's a sort of sub-message in the Bible, it is don't be a parent who favors your children over the other. You're making a mess for them, right? We'll see you next time.